Welcome back to History Recapped, the channel where we dive deep into the stories that shaped our world. Today we begin one of the most ambitious episodes we've ever created. The complete history of the British Empire, from a small island kingdom on the edge of Europe to ruling over a quarter of the planet's land and people. This is the rise, dominance, and ultimate decline of the empire on which the sun never set. Stay with us until the end, because the twists, battles, and betrayals of this story are unlike anything you've seen before. The story of the British Empire begins long before it was ever called British. In 1066, William the Conqueror's victory at the Battle of Hastings transformed England into a centralized, militarized kingdom. The Normans introduced feudalism, fortified castles, and the foundations of a unified English state, all essential for the future empire. Over the next 4 centuries, England's rulers fought to consolidate their power at home and abroad. The 100 Years' War with France, fought between 1337 and 1453, forged a hardened military tradition and a growing sense of national identity. But England remained a relatively minor player compared to continental powers like Spain and Portugal. By the late 15th century, change was on the horizon. The reign of Henry VII and the dawn of the Tudor dynasty marked a turning point. England's kings saw wealth and power shifting to the seas, as Spain and Portugal carved empires across the Americas and Africa. Henry's son, Henry VIII, broke from the Catholic Church in 1534, establishing the Church of England. This act wasn't just religious, it was geopolitical. It freed England from papal control and allowed it to chart its own course in Europe's scramble for overseas dominance. When Elizabeth I took the throne in 1558, England was still fragile, but she had a vision, turned the kingdom into a maritime power. Under her rule, explorers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh launched daring expeditions across the Atlantic, establishing the first tentative English colonies in the Americas. The defining moment came in 1588, when the mighty Spanish Armada, the most powerful fleet in the world, sailed to invade England. Outnumbered and outgunned, Elizabeth's smaller, faster navy, aided by storms the English called the Protestant Wind, delivered a shocking defeat to Spain. This victory announced England's arrival on the world stage. For the first time, the island kingdom realized it could challenge Europe's great powers and win. But this was only the beginning. With Spain's dominance fading, England, soon to be Britain, would seize its chance to claim lands across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The birth of the first British Empire was near, but so were bitter rivalries, brutal conquests, and the seeds of future rebellions. By the early 1600s, England's ambitions had grown far beyond its shores. The foundation of Britain's imperial expansion was laid with the creation of the East India Company in 1600. Granted a royal charter by Queen Elizabeth I, it began as a modest trading venture but would soon become the spearhead of Britain's dominance in Asia. Over the next century, British merchants fought Portuguese, Dutch, and French rivals for control of lucrative spice, silk, and tea routes, laying the groundwork for the empire's wealth. At the same time, Britain began establishing colonies across the Americas. The founding of Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607, marked the first permanent English settlement in North America. Over the next 100 years, 13 colonies grew along the eastern seaboard, populated by settlers seeking freedom, land, and fortune. Tobacco, sugar, and cotton fueled Britain's economy, while enslaved Africans were shipped across the Atlantic in one of history's darkest chapters, the transatlantic slave trade. By the late 17th century, Britain's naval power exploded. Under leaders like Oliver Cromwell and later Charles II, the Royal Navy became the backbone of the empire, ensuring control of sea routes and enforcing dominance over colonial rivals. Britain's growing presence clashed with that of France, sparking a series of wars that would define the 18th century. The most decisive of these was the 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, often called the First World War. Britain and France fought across Europe, the Caribbean, North America, India, and Africa. When the war ended, Britain emerged as the clear victor. France ceded Canada and much of its North American territory, while Britain seized key territories in India, setting the stage for nearly 2 centuries of dominance on the subcontinent. But victory came at a cost. Maintaining far-flung colonies required enormous resources, and Britain turned to taxing its American colonies to cover expenses. This would ignite a rebellion that forever changed the empire. In 1775, the American Revolutionary War erupted. 13 colonies declared independence, guided by leaders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Despite Britain's military superiority, the combination of colonial resolve, French intervention, and logistical challenges across the Atlantic led to a stunning defeat. By 1783, the Treaty of Paris recognized the birth of the United States of America. Losing the 13 colonies was a blow, but Britain refused to retreat from global ambitions. Instead, it turned its focus toward Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. India became the jewel of the empire. Through alliances, wars, and trade monopolies, the East India Company transformed from a merchant enterprise into a governing power, ruling vast territories and hundreds of millions of people. By the dawn of the 19th century, Britain's empire had adapted, rebuilt, and prepared for a new challenge, confronting the rising power of Napoleon Bonaparte and securing its place as the world's leading superpower. But Britain's dominance would not go unchallenged. Ahead lay massive upheaval, from the Napoleonic Wars to the abolition of slavery, and from industrial transformation to global rivalries that would redraw the map of the world. The turn of the 19th century marked a decisive moment for Britain. As Europe descended into chaos, a single figure rose to dominate the continent: Napoleon Bonaparte. Britain now faced its greatest challenge yet, a war that would shape the fate of the empire. The Napoleonic Wars, 1803–1815, were a clash of titans. While Napoleon's armies swept through Europe, Britain relied on its naval supremacy to choke France's ambitions. The Royal Navy, under the legendary Admiral Horatio Nelson, achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, cementing Britain's control of the seas and ensuring that Napoleon's dreams of invading the British Isles would never materialize. But Britain was more than just a military power. It was becoming the workshop of the world. The Industrial Revolution transformed the empire, fueling advances in technology, manufacturing, and transportation. Coal-powered factories, steamships, and railways allowed Britain to produce goods on an unprecedented scale, flooding global markets and cementing its economic dominance. Following Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, Britain stood unrivaled. The Congress of Vienna redrew the map of Europe, and Britain emerged as a global superpower, controlling territories that stretched from the Caribbean to the Indian subcontinent. Its colonial possessions provided resources and markets, while its navy ensured unrivaled dominance across the seas. Yet this period was also marked by profound social change. In 1807, Britain abolished the transatlantic slave trade, and by 1833, slavery itself was outlawed across the empire. These reforms reshaped Britain's moral identity, though they also disrupted the economies of colonies reliant on enslaved labor. The Victorian era began in 1837, ushering in the reign of Queen Victoria, under whom the empire reached unprecedented heights. India, administered through the East India Company, became the empire's crown jewel. But discontent simmered beneath the surface. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was a turning point. After brutal suppression, control of India shifted from the Company to the British Crown, marking the formal creation of the British Raj. Elsewhere, Britain expanded its influence in Africa, Australia, and the Pacific. Explorers mapped unknown lands, while settlers established colonies from New Zealand to South Africa. Missionaries, traders, and soldiers carried Britain's influence to every corner of the globe. By the late 19th century, the empire encompassed nearly a quarter of the Earth's landmass and ruled over 400 million people. But with great power came new challenges. Rival empires were rising, nationalism was spreading, and cracks were beginning to form beneath Britain's seemingly unshakable dominance. The age of absolute supremacy was nearing its end. By the dawn of the 20th century, the British Empire stood at its zenith, the largest the world had ever seen. Spanning continents, ruling millions, and controlling global trade, it seemed unstoppable. But beneath the surface, challenges were growing, and soon the empire would face its greatest tests. The first came with the Boer Wars in South Africa, 1880–1881 and 1899–1902. These conflicts against Dutch settlers were brutal, exposing weaknesses in Britain's military and the limits of its control. Though Britain eventually emerged victorious, the wars were costly and controversial, leaving deep scars in the empire's reputation. Then came the First World War, 1914-1918. Britain, bound by treaties and alliances, was drawn into a conflict unlike any before. Millions of soldiers from across the empire, from Canada, Australia, India, South Africa and beyond, fought alongside British forces in the trenches of Europe, the deserts of the Middle East and the seas of the Atlantic. While Britain and its allies emerged victorious, the war exacted a devastating toll. Hundreds of thousands dead, staggering debts and a shaken global standing. In the aftermath, Britain tried to maintain its supremacy, but cracks began to widen. The interwar years saw rising nationalist movements across the empire, especially in India, where leaders like Mahatma Gandhi mobilized millions in the struggle for independence. At the same time, economic turmoil during the Great Depression weakened Britain's grip on global trade. Then in 1939, the empire faced its second great cataclysm, World War II. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland, Britain declared war, plunging itself into another global conflict. The empire once again mobilized its vast resources, drawing troops from across its colonies. Britain survived the Blitz, fought back against Rommel's forces in North Africa, and helped lead the D-Day landings in Normandy. Victory in 1945 cemented Britain's place among the Allied powers, but at an enormous cost. The war left Britain economically exhausted. The United States and the Soviet Union had risen as superpowers, and the empire no longer had the wealth or influence to dominate the globe as it once had. In the years that followed, decolonization swept across the world. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947, inspiring a wave of liberation movements across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. By the 1950s and 1960s, former colonies from Ghana to Malaysia achieved independence. The Suez Crisis of 1956, when Britain's attempt to control the Suez Canal ended in political humiliation, symbolized the empire's waning influence on the world stage. What remained became the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association of former colonies and territories bound by shared history, culture, and cooperation. Britain no longer ruled the seas, but it adapted, reshaping its identity from imperial power to global partner. The official end of the empire came gradually, with Hong Kong's return to China in 1997 often seen as the symbolic closing chapter. From its beginnings as a small island kingdom to ruling a quarter of the planet, the British Empire reshaped the modern world, for better and for worse. The empire that once claimed it would last forever is gone, but its legacy remains everywhere, in our laws, our languages, our borders, and our politics. The British Empire may have ended, but its shadow still stretches across history. Thanks for watching History Recapped. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to share, like and subscribe, and let us know what moment in history you want recapped next.